I'm Nancy. This is my daughter Heather, and we are welcoming you to the Knapton Cove Heritage Center right here on the banks of the mighty Columbia River. The Knapton Cove Heritage Center was formed by my daughter and I in about 1995. My parents had retired and were living here on this old quarantine station that they had purchased in 1950. And we decided that it was worthy of historic preservation. We had been placed on the National Register for Historic Places and felt that we were sort of obligated to carry on the history of this site. And this is what the station looked like when it began operation. The station was purchased from an old cannery that was here previously in 1899, and the station opened in 1899. For perspective, Ellis Island opened in 1891. There were about 40 of these immigration stations throughout the country, and we were one of 4 major ones on the West Coast. Anytime you entered the United States after 1891, Congress had mandated the health inspection of all incoming immigrants, passengers, and crew. And that was to prevent the spread of infectious disease that was shipborne disease was very much a problem. Rats were the big problem. They the fleas on the rats carried the bubonic plague, and they were really aware of keeping that out of the United States. So when you entered the United States, any port that you entered, your ship anchored in the harbor, and the officer, who was a physician from what was then the Marine Hospital Service, that is today's Public Health Service, that person inspected the ship to see if it was any disease aboard or looking for rats. They were always looking for rats because they were the culprits. And if that ship was not clean, and if there was somebody a little green around the gills and they're thinking, you know what, this ship is dirty and we need to clean it up, and you have to be fumigated. So you were sent to a fumigation center. And this dock building out here, that we have a big piling field out here, that building housed the fumigation facilities. I'm going to have Heather explain about the fumigation process that took place right out here in front of this place.
So when the ship was ordered to come over here, it got secured on there's some very tall dolphins out on the river that you can still see. They're called dolphins, and they look like a teepee, a whole section of piling that are secured at the top. And there's 2 of them, and that indicates that there's an ocean-going vessel that can be secured right there. So your vessel would come in, and the passengers would get off. They would immediately have to take off their clothing, which, could have been a bit alarming at times. And they were put right into the showers. And then their luggage was sent into a different area that had retorts, where there was these big containers that they put them through and fumigated them. And then they had to also fumigate the ship that they were on. So the ship was fumigated with big sulfur pots to begin with. So they took these big sulfur pots on the ship and burned them. And that apparently got rid of all the fleas on the rats and whatever else might be there to infect a person. The whole process took about 48 hours. And so when the people were cleaned up, they either got sent to a tent that was out here, or for a while there was a decommissioned military ship, the USS Concord, that was kind of a boat and breakfast, I guess. They got to go be over there until their ship was ready. And hopefully within 48 hours, they could get back on their nice and clean ship and head up the river to Portland. So when we started the Knapton Cove Heritage Center, we were focused really on that quarantine era, and those were some of the artifacts that we had that were obvious to us from this era. We have this one shard that says USMHS that my uncle, who lives on the grounds, found in the Tidelands, and that indicates the United States Marine Hospital Service before it became the Public Health Service. So that was a really exciting piece of artifact to find because it dated it to this time period. And then we have a medical bottle that my grandmother, right? Mm-hmm. She had when they bought the place. And that one also that's when they changed the name from the U.S. Marine Hospital Service to the U.S. Marine and Public Health Service. Mm-hmm. Am I right? And so that was a short period of time when it had that very long name before it became just the U.S. Public Health Service. So again, it's an artifact that dates it to before, 1912. Mm-hmm. And so we do bottle rubbings of that because that's kind of fun. And then let's see, some of our other, there's been some other hospital bottles that we've found, of course. And can you think of any other artifacts?
Manuscripts that were
Oh,
left
there's
here.
quite a few paper items. So ephemera, different kinds of catalogs, and public health bulletins that my grandmother thankfully saved from my grandfather, who was cleaning up the place to run his campground, and he was throwing everything in the river. But she said, no, these things are worth saving. So, Clarence, let's just keep these. So thankfully, we have some very interesting paper artifacts, and even some orders, government orders, letters that the person in charge here, who was Ole Estes, he had beautiful handwriting, and he wrote out these beautiful orders from the government of things he needed, like wash pans and flags, tumblers,
Soap.
things like that, boric acid, things like that. So we do have some of those too, some original documents.
Before Knapton Cove Heritage Center became a quarantine station, there was a microcosm of Pacific Northwest history. It was Chinook fishing grounds. The tribal people fished out here. The salmon was a big draw for almost everybody that came. Following that, the Lewis and Clark expedition came west. That opened up the west to pioneers who followed that. This site is on the National Historic Lewis and Clark Canoe Trail. They canoed right past here in 1805. And then that opened it up, as I said, for the pioneers. The Western movement became, we had a pioneer donation land claim home right out in front here. And that was, he was a river captain. He became the first, that was Lamley. He became the first sheriff of this county. Then that led into the cannery era, and there were 40 canneries eventually on this Columbia River. Canning was, the salmon was a big deal, and it was going out worldwide. And you can tell them about the canneries.
Yeah, we have, Joseph Hume was the one of 4 Hume brothers who owned the cannery right out here. And we've identified 3 different labels that were used at this site, which are kind of interesting. The first one has Joseph Hume's portrait on it. He put his face on it, which is kind of fun. And then, and also as a note, the older canning labels were red because the rust on the cans was a little bit a detraction from buying them, so they made the labels red to disguise the rust.
Little marketing
So again,
ploy.
it's a way how we can date the labels. The second label that we found is, the one we found in an antique shop around here. We knew that the name of the cannery was the Eureka and Epicure Packing Company, and it was the Star brand. And interestingly, this label has Lady Liberty on it, and she's holding a nice big salmon and a really big can of salmon, like she's been at Costco. And this is before, this really looked like New York over there, and it still doesn't look like New York, but they thought maybe it would. And there's a bridge on the label, as if the bridge, of course, wasn't built till the 60s, 1960s. So they had visions of an amazing metropolis across the river. And the wonderful thing about that label is that, it was used before this was even an Ellis Island kind of a story. So pretty interesting that they were taking things that were happening in the country, which was the gift of the Statue of Liberty from France, and they were, putting it on labels because people were interested in that kind of thing. And then lo and behold, this site actually became a bit of, a site where immigrants might come through. The other label we have was actually found, it was donated just a couple years ago by a granddaughter of one of the first assistant physicians that lived here, and it was in her grandfather's possessions. So we figured when he took over the quarantine station, this was probably something laying around that he thought, oh, this is kind of fun, and it ended up with his granddaughter. So it's another beautiful label. So those are, and then we also have a lot of other artifacts from that cannery era. The census in 1890 had 70 Chinese people working here, and we find a lot of Chinese pottery shards that come up when you're planting something or you're putting in a line for electricity or what have you. And we also find some opium bottles, and we find some clay pipes, and my uncle has found soldering irons and also the tokens that the cannery used for a payment system. So those are some kind of interesting artifacts that we found.
And all of these things led up to the necessity for looking for shipborne disease. All of this progression with more people coming here, and the ships were not very clean, and that was why the U.S. really decided we needed to monitor our ports of entry. Sarah and Job Lamley were the pioneers that came west that established a donation land claim here on this property. They had a large family, and he was a bar pilot captain. He was a river-going man, and he was elected the first sheriff of Pacific County. I think he won with 9 votes. This was not a very highly inhabited area, but he was quite prestigious in this particular area and built a beautiful home right out by the river here. He sold the lower portion, this portion, finally, when he was ready to leave and retire, to the Joseph Hume for a cannery. The upper portion of the donation land claim was sold to J.B. Knapp, and the little town of Knappton, which was a mill town, is upriver, about a quarter of a mile upriver here from us, another big piling field. And it was quite a going little town. It had a dance hall, it had a hotel, a post office, 24 homes, and quite a business that went on up there. So that's where the name Knappton comes into this area.
We have a couple artifacts from the donation land claim era, from Job and Sarah Lamley's beautiful house. Sadly, the house burned down, so we don't have that anymore. But my grandmother found some hardware out in the area right in front here where the house stood. And she also found a frozen Charlotte doll, which are those little ceramic, those little white dolls that are just about that big. And I think my brother found one of those too, a little bit more broken by the time he came around, but we have those over in the museum also that you can see. After the quarantine era passed here, people were traveling more by airplane at that point, so there was not the necessity to bring people in through ships and inspection at that point at the rivers. It went on the government auction block by 1950. It had been vacated for a while, and that's when my grandfather bought it. And my mother has quite a few memories of that era because she was just 12 at the time, so it occupied a big part of her life from 12 years on.
Yeah, my dad looked at this. It was on this General Service Administration auction block. And if you don't know about that, you can buy all kinds of strange things and some practical if you go online and look at the GSA auction. And my brother had already purchased some pretty strange things, and he came up with this particular property that was for sale. It had lain dormant since it closed in 1939, 38, 39. And in 1950, the government, in all its wisdom, said, we need to sell this place and get rid of it. So it went up for auction. And my dad was an avid sports fisherman. We always fished down here anyway. And we lived in Portland, and a lot of Portlanders and Seattle people came down here to fish for those salmon. The salmon derbies were a big deal in the 1950s, 40s, actually 40s and 50s. And we went after that elusive salmon. When he looked at the grounds here, he thought this would make a perfect place for a boat moorage, for camping. We could draw people here to come and camp. And indeed, that's what he did. And for clear up until the highway decided to come through, intersecting our tideland from the property, he ran a pretty good sport fishing camp here. We camped here, we lived here every summer from 1950 on, and ran this campground for fishermen.
Well, it was even featured in Sunset Magazine as a premier resort destination.
In 1956, it made Sunset Magazine, and we had 75 boats moored out on this beautiful dock. Great place to moor boats. And my dad set me up in business. I sold fishing tackle and Boyd's coffee and candy bars out there on the dock. to fishermen coming. It was also Derby days, and people loved to join the Derby. You could for $2 a day, which was quite a bit back then, actually. You could get competition. If you caught the biggest salmon of the day, you got a monetary prize. And at the end of the derbies, there was a really big prize, like $1,000 or something for the biggest fish.
And, well, can you tell us about the fishing plug that you got to sell?
Yes, I sold what was called Wallace Highliners. The big selling plug, the Lucky Louie. Well, Lucky Louie had the franchise to sell down at the ferry landing, which is 2 miles downriver from us here, only accessible by water at that time. But we couldn't, we were too close, so we had to sell Wallace Highliners. But Wallace Highliner had a great marketing thing. The Lucky Louie Pearl Pink was the hot plug. Don't ask me why, it was really kind of pallid. But anyway, they made one that was half pearl pink and the other half looked more like a fish. And man, did I sell those suckers. I had a good line, and I just made up stuff about how big you could catch a fish on this. And the proceeds that my parents made, my dad was a teacher in Portland, so, you know, salaries were not terrific. And the money they made on the campground here put me through Oregon State College. So I am a beaver. During the campground days, when we spent all our summers here, artifacts began to surface. My mother was so interested in history, and as Heather mentioned, my dad just wanted to clean the place up. So among the artifacts that we have found, both on land, we have two excavation people at work, not people, creatures, things. The tidal action is one of our best archaeological helpers. This has quite a tide here, and it goes way out. We find stuff out there all the time. Among them, possibly a few of my dad's beer bottles that he also pulled, which I don't think are artifacts. We have to sort them. And also the moles bring up things. And one day, my husband was out mowing the grass and kicking over the molehills, because they do like this place. And he found 7 little blue beads. Well, those turned out to be Indian trade beads. And so that began to pique our interest that this had a lot of history here. That was documented by archaeologists that were working at Fort Clatsop at the time, and they are indeed the trade beads. And we know that in 1792, this was documented by one of Vancouver's lieutenants that came in the river here. 5 months after Robert Gray came in and claimed it for the United States, the British came in and they were charting and mapping. And we know that he anchored right out in front here and went upriver in the cutter. That's a small boat they have on board their sailing vessels for exploration. And he named Vancouver and Mount Hood, all that stuff. But while the guys were here with the kind of a skeleton crew that stayed here, we know they traded with the Indians that were already camped here fishing. And according to their log, the ladies came on daily to be adorned with beads and buttons. And we're pretty sure one of those little Chinook ladies dropped her beads someplace, and those might be the ones we found.
All of this history and all of these artifacts that we had laying around really led to us wanting to keep it and be able to share the story. So in 1995, we formed the Knapton Cove Heritage Center. And at that point, we were just, at the very beginning, we didn't really know what we were doing. And we, you know, as time, a few years went on, we thought, wow, this is kind of a money pit. And we better figure out a way to, you know, increase our funding rather than just our own bank accounts. So we did form a nonprofit in 2005. Mm-hmm. So 10 years later, 2005, we formed the Knapton Cove Heritage Center as a nonprofit group. And so we have a working board of directors, which they work really hard. They build decks for us, and they design things, and they mow the lawns, and, you know, I'll fix pipes when we can. There's all kinds of things that we get them doing. And we're always looking for, you know, for help, because it's not a huge source of funding. But we have, we send out our yearly newsletter, and that really, we have over 350 members, I believe. And so those small to big donations really help keep us going.
Here at the Knapton Cove Heritage Center, our mission is historic preservation. We have been supported a lot by the Clatsop Community College Historic Preservation classes and students who have done major restoration on this building. We want to preserve the building because we think that this building is rather unique. As it turns out, due to research from one of our board members, this is the only remaining government lazaretto, which means pest house, that remains available to the public in the United States. So we're kind of the last pest house standing. It tells a story that not only encompasses immigration, but also public health history. So we focus on public health history and immigration, and then we throw in all these other stories from the past that led up to all of this too. But the main mission is the historic preservation and interpretation of all the history and the layers of history at this site.
So if you're a history buff or just somebody who wants to find out more about local history around this area, please come visit us. We are open July and August summer Saturday afternoons from 1 to 4, and we might be expanding those. And to find out exactly what our hours are, you can visit our website, which is www.knaptoncoveheritagecenter.org. We would welcome your membership. You could get our newsletter.
We are a nonprofit, which allows us to not only seek apply for grants. We don't always get them, but we really welcome individuals who are interested enough in history and just the preservation aspect of what we are doing here. Your financial help is always welcome. The membership is $20 a year, and that allows you to keep abreast of what's going on here. We welcome tour groups. We have had several bus tours, and that helps us quite a bit financially. And remember that all of these things are tax deductible, and your reward is not financial, but we just think your reward is knowing that you are helping preserve the stories and the history of this little part of the Pacific Northwest. We look forward to seeing you soon. We are always open by appointment year-round, even if the weather's crummy. We hope you will look at attending some of our events. We welcome families and students, certainly, small field trip groups, anything like that will help us preserve this story. We would appreciate.